Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sam Cox, retired Rear Admiral, Director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, and it is an honor for me to be here today. Back in 1993, my wife wrote her master's thesis on the strategic implications of the Spratly Islands, which got her an A and a Navy subspecialty as a strategist. But pretty much everyone who read it or heard about it was like, huh, what, where? And so when I was reading a Washington Post review of the new book 2034, a novel of the next World War by James Stavridis and Elliot Ackerman, I noted that the crisis began at Mischief Reef in the Spratly Islands. So I told my wife, hey honey, got to get you this book. Well, she hasn't seen it yet because once I cracked it open, I couldn't put it down. The authenticity in it is incredible. It is a thriller. In fact, I might even call it a futuristic horror story that scares me more than any novel by Stephen King. I first knew of Admiral Stavridis long before I actually met him. He was a highly successful destroyer skipper of the Barry Battenberg Cup, best ship in the Atlantic Fleet, destroyer division commander, destroyer squadron commander, and also commander of the Enterprise Battle Group. One thing that set him apart was his willingness to put his secret sauce for leadership onto paper and act as a virtual mentor to the rest of the Navy. His updates of classic works such as the Watch Officer's Guide, Division Officer's Guide, Command at Sea, and his own destroyer captain are gold for any junior officer who's looking for what's the path to success in the United States Navy. As a senior officer, 4-star as commander of the U.S. Southern Command, and also later as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, which is the senior NATO commander, which by the way is responsible for Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, cybersecurity, anti-piracy, and a whole raft of other major issues. He was known as a strategic thinker, visionary, but not one of these visionaries that just throws something up against the wall and see if it sticks. He had the unique ability to be both out of the box and grounded in practical reality at the same time, which is a unique feat. After retiring from 37 years of active duty, he continued his passion for passing on learning to others, serving for 5 years as the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and only recently retiring from that. But he has also served as a consultant for NBC News, and he was considered for high-level positions by both candidate Clinton and by then President-elect Trump. So that's a measure of his respect on both sides of the aisle. As I was reading the book, a couple thoughts struck me. Is that one, in 1898, there was a book written originally named Futility, later named The Wreck of the Titan, which was about the largest passenger liner in the world, named the Titan, crashing into an iceberg in the North Atlantic in April, and not having enough lifeboats for the passengers. And then in 1925, there was another novel called The Great Pacific War, which captured what actually happened during the war with Japan with uncanny precision. And I was reading this book, I had the sense that, well, I'm not reading a book that's that prescient, but my fear is that it is. One of the things that the book captured very well is something that I have been concerned about, as a former intelligence officer, director of intelligence for U.S. Cyber Command, and a historian. The mindset that exists in the U.S. military today is not all that different, in my view, from that existed prior to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. For 20 years, and actually longer, we have watched as the Chinese continue to gain on us, and frankly, that is accelerating. And if we don't do something about it, if we don't take this book as a warning, we're going to be in deep trouble. The book clearly shows what is characterized as the same phenomena that occurred before 9/11 and actually before Pearl Harbor, is a failure of imagination. The unwillingness to believe that a potential adversary has the capability to pull operational and tactical and technological surprises. I do remember back in the early 2000s, a four-star boss of mine giving a description of a discussion he had with a very senior Chinese admiral who had told him that, on day one of the war between the United States and China, the United States is going to be in for the biggest surprise in our history. And on day two, China is going to be financially broke. Well, in this book, you see that the Chinese pull off that surprise. The other point would be is that you can see it coming. If you read the book, it shouldn't be a surprise. The ability of what cyber warfare will be capable of doing in the future, when you couple it with advancing all kinds of advancing military technology, we're looking at a very difficult future. There are those who go, well, it'll all turn out in the end because we're Americans and we're exceptional, and that's how it turns out. But my message for spoiling parties is that the one thing that every great Navy before us has in common is that they declined. So the odds are against us. So unless we take active steps within the Navy, within the military, within the government, and banish any thoughts of complacency about how serious this threat is, we will be in deep trouble, and that's how it plays out in this book. So with that, my understanding is that if you have, although this is a virtual event, if you have any questions, you can type them in via chat and get an answer as the presentation is ongoing. So thank you for your attention, and thank you to Admiral Stavridis and Elliot Ackerman for an extraordinary work of fiction that is not fictional enough. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Admiral Cox. And for those that are not familiar with his brilliant career and what he's doing now, he is our host for today's event. And he is the director of the Navy History and Heritage Command. And thank you for the introduction. And now it's my honor to turn this over to Admiral Stavridis. Over to you to explain your book, sir.
Admiral Masso, thank you very much. I remember when it was Ensign Masso and Ensign Stavridis serving together on a pair of Spruance-class destroyers. Here are four words that don't go together anymore. Brand new Spruance destroyers. I was on Hewitt, or in Hewitt, excuse me, and Sonny Masso, Ensign Masso, was over on the Flyer, Paul F. Foster. So what a pleasure teaming up again after decades, although fortunately our careers have managed to overlap along the way.
One of the things that came to fruition in late April was a book review in the Washington Post, of which they called your book a Sputnik moment. And I've heard other people at the consumer electronics shows and the government business executive forums and that state that we need really a Manhattan type project to catch up with how far we're behind in the Chinese threat and artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics, quantum computing, things of this nature. How do you reconcile that? Do you agree with what they say? And what are your proposed solutions to try to catch up?
Well, first of all, I think we're not yet deeply behind China. In fact, I think broadly speaking, in the areas you described, Sonny, so cyber, artificial intelligence, machine learning, applications in those areas, I think broadly we're a year or two ahead of them, but they're closing that gap very quickly. And the report to read that I highly recommend to anyone who's listening would be the National Security Report on Artificial Intelligence. And it was a commission put together by or led by, I should say, former Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work and former chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, two people who are deeply into this issue. And they would tell you again that we're probably still have a narrow lead ahead of China. But I think the Sputnik moment is what I describe in 2034. And if we don't redouble our efforts, by 2034, we will certainly be in that Sputnik territory where we suddenly find ourselves well behind where China is. We can still avoid that. We can look at 2034, and the novel in that sense is a cautionary tale. And we can reverse engineer ourselves back to the present and do what we need to do. So the report I just mentioned has 80 pages of pretty cogent recommendations, but I'll give you 3 top hits, if you will, none of which are going to surprise anybody. One is we need to increase the level of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, computer science that is taught at every level in our educational systems. And that may be the most important thing we do. And that's where China is really beating us badly in educating very broadly. And then on top of that, you know how we curate athletes? We find out who the very best athletes are in every single sport. And we have systems that relentlessly move a LeBron James to the top of the NBA. Where's a system like that in STEM? Doesn't exist, except it does exist in China. China has systems where they are surveying the broad scope of young people, finding the best and the brightest, giving them opportunities, moving them along, incentivizing, rewarding them, moving them forward relentlessly, just like we are picking out the best figure skaters or marathon runners for the U.S. Olympic team, or the best football players, basketball players for our professional sports. China's doing that with STEM. Pretty smart. That's number one. Number two is good old-fashioned research and development. And this has got to be funded by the government. You know, there's this kind of narrative out there that, oh, we don't have to worry about that because the private sector is going to do all that. Hey, the private sector will do a lot, and they are doing a lot, but they are not going to be directed and focused, particularly on the national security considerations that are going to be so germane here. So I think there's a significant role for the government in increasing the level of funding. And if that's not infrastructure in the sense of the Biden infrastructure plan, I don't know what is. That is 21st century infrastructure, is the basic building blocks of high technology. So taking some of those trillions of dollars that are coming out in the Biden plan and applying them to R&D in our national laboratories, at our national university systems, which is where a great deal of this research occurs, letting the services do this by contracting to the defense companies, research and developing funding. So that's number two. And then number three, I kind of alluded to it a moment ago, but it's private-public cooperation. It is harnessing what's happening in Silicon Valley, what's happening in the 128 tech belt around Boston, in Austin, Texas, in the private sector, the world of startups, the world of every kind of applied program interface, all of that, this great massive cloud computing enterprise Amazon has built, what Google is doing, getting those private sector companies engaged with the public sector side of this in a national security context. SecDef Ash Carter worked very hard at this, created an entity called DIUX. It kind of still exists. That would be a place I would put a lot of focus on, finding mechanisms for private-public cooperation in all of these areas. So, Sonny, there's just a few ideas kind of off the top. We still have a narrow lead, as I mentioned, but if we don't maintain that lead, we are going to fall back. We're going to find ourselves in a Sputnik moment that we want to avoid.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. And of course, you did touch on President Biden's infrastructure SCADA system development and upgrade program. And of course, we just here in Virginia were victims of a pipeline disruption. And do you see more of those types of events occurring almost like in a pre-rehearsal for something larger? And if so, in what areas would you predict?
Definitely, we are going to see many more of these wide scope cyber attacks. And we need to recognize that some of them will be espionage driven, some of them will be intellectual property theft driven, some of them will be ransomware driven. The Colonial Pipeline that you're describing was certainly one of those. Some of them will be focused on disabling portions of our electric grid, our financial systems. So unfortunately, yes, we're going to see, I think, much more of this. A couple of reasons for that. One is that it's a relatively inexpensive way for many of our opponents, not just Russia and China, but nations like North Korea and Iran, for example, to have an equalizer. Cyber is relatively inexpensive compared to building massive kinetic machines of war like aircraft carriers, for example. So back to what we were speaking of a moment ago, if you make the investments that we discussed and you are smart about how you pool your knowledge and your talented people with between, for example, Russia and China, who are drawing closer together, between China and Iran, who are drawing closer together, between North Korea and China, who already have a deeply entwined defense set of mechanisms, you will find that you can create these offensive cyber tools, unfortunately, quite easily. So the question becomes, what should we be doing about it? Number one, we need to harden our defenses, be aware of what's happening. Number two, we need to increase our level of intelligence and information gathering. Number three, we need to work with our allies, partners, and friends, not just, for example, within NATO, with the Brits and the French and the Germans, who are pretty good at this, but the Japanese, who are very good, with the Israelis, who are phenomenal on a per capita basis. They may be the best cyber nation in the world. Even the Estonians, 1 million people live in Estonia, yet it is home to several corporations that are at the forefront of cyber and cyber security. So allies, partners, and friends is part of the equation. And then finally, we need to work now to create deterrent regimes. Ask yourself, why did we never end up using nuclear weapons during the long decades of the Cold War? And the answer is because of mutual assured destruction. We believed, I think correctly, that once you pull a nuclear weapon out of the locker and use it, even if it's only, I put that in air quotes, a tactical nuclear weapon, you are still going to start, I think, moving up that ladder of escalation. That's one of the scenarios that we explore in 2034, a novel of the next World War, that loss of the ladder of escalation. So even as we had that kind of deterrent regime for nuclear weapons, we need that for cyber, because these tools, these offensive cyber tools, are beginning to approach society-busting capability. So there's a basket of ideas that we can be thinking about. But the short answer to your question, are we going to see more of this, is yes.
So thank you for that. And there's a lot of directions we can go with your great answer. Certainly the Naval Academy and the superintendent, Sean Buck, has just been brilliant in what he's investing in the Hopper Center. We at the foundation and Sam's History and Heritage Command have a very close connection to the Brigade of Midshipmen. And in fact, Dr. Jack London Leadership Essay Contest was won by a third-class mid whose paper was on integrity of exercises. And her name is Jennifer Sun. And I pointed out because it leads to the question, when Admiral Nimitz was queried, a few years after the Second World War, what were your thoughts on how we were able to prepare for the Second World War? He said there was only one thing that they hadn't rehearsed at the War College, and that was the asymmetrical kamikaze. So the question here is are we doing enough in the cyber? Are we mindful of those disciplines and things like that? And to that end, are we really challenging ourselves in the in combatant commands and otherwise in rehearsing for these types of events?
I think we are, to be honest. I would not have said yes to that question 10 years ago. I think about 5 years ago, you started to see a growing, significant emphasis on this. During this period of time, of course, the Navy creates the 10th Fleet. Brilliant three-star Vice Admiral Jan Tighe, for example, commanded it. Our current Chief of Naval Operations, Mike Gilday, commanded not, the 7th Fleet, the 5th Fleet, the 6th Fleet, the glamour fleets forward. Mike Gilday commanded the 10th Fleet. So we're recognizing this more and more. You correctly allude to the focus here at the Naval Academy. I will say the Naval Academy has been at this for a long time. When I was a midshipman in 1975, otherwise known as 1.2 million years ago, I took a class in programming in BASIC, COBOL, the languages. Grace Hopper came to our class. That was pretty exciting to actually meet amazing Grace. I met her several times over the course of the early days of my career. She really was quite remarkable in so many ways. So the Naval Academy's been at this for a while. I think the war colleges have been picking it up. And so where it stands now, I think, Admiral, is that it is embedded in many ways inside the combatant commands. It's part and parcel of operating forward. I think the question on the horizon, in my view, is it time to create a cyber force? And, my answer is yes. In fact, my answer is should have done it about 10 years ago. And by the way, I applaud the creation of the Space Force by the Trump administration. If it had been me driving the train, I would have gone with a cyber force first. But the two are intertwined. And the idea, the arguments for creating a Space Force are very similar to creating a cyber force. You need individuals who are dedicated to the craft of cyber from the minute they put on the cloth of the nation. What we have now in cyber is, I hate to say it, kind of a pickup team feel to it. Each of the services has some version of the Navy's information warfare designator. Again, a positive improvement that came along in the last decade. But it's different in each of the services. The training is different. The integration of role is different till they get up to the cyber command, the combatant commander for this. They're not really permanently in this. So I think creating a cyber force would be the next logical step here. Overall, I would say we are accelerating, improving in this area, and we've come a long way in the last 10 years, and I think a long way even in the last 5 years. Next step, cyber force.
Yes, sir. Kind of going back to your team, because most readers that I have spoken to, appreciated that you had female leadership, and Sarah Hunt certainly, and in your mind, how did they perform? In all of the aspects of their immediate response, and then their lack of ability to communicate with the United States 7th Fleet. In your mind, where were you going with that in a sense? Were you just trying to elucidate the challenge that they were facing? But how did you kind of put a tweak in there that, that we were okay and that was the right leadership?
Well, first of all, there are two significant female leaders in the book. Right. One, of course, is Sarah Hunt, the Commodore for this ill-fated 3-ship flotilla steaming in what she thinks is going to be a routine freedom of navigation patrol, and it all goes terribly wrong. And, you can pick apart some of the decisions that Sarah made in the course of that event. But at the end of the day, In my view, there's nothing remarkable about the fact that she's a woman, nor is there anything different about the way she responds. Recall, and you will, Sonny, that when I was captain in USS Barry, Barry was chosen as one of the first tiny number of combatants to have a mixed gender crew. So I started command of the Barry with an all-male crew. About halfway through my 2.5-year command tour, women came, and suddenly I had a mixed gender crew. And you know, we had a lot of concern about it in the ship, and we spent a lot of time preparing for it and talking about what it would be like. And let me tell you something, about 3 weeks after the women showed up, we the men all looked at each other and said, what was that all about? Because they were just shipmates. They were just shipmates. And and I think if you look today at the surface Navy, which of all the combat arms, I believe, of the United States, I think we have a higher percentage of women in the surface line, the surface navies, than any other segment. And so it's, in my view, entirely consistent with the composition of the force that you would see a Commodore. And in fact, her flagship happens to be commanded by a woman who sadly dies in that first engagement. So nothing particularly remarkable there in my view. Now, the second major leadership role filled by a woman, of course, is the President of the United States. Again, I would be surprised if we have not had a female president by 10 to 15 years from now when this book is set. But what is remarkable about her, in my view, she's neither a Republican nor a Democrat. And where I was going with that is just looking at the two political parties and then looking at how many, many young people, notably millennials, increasingly look at both parties and are disenchanted, particularly by the political extremes in both of these parties. And I say that as the dad of two millennial daughters who are married to two wonderful millennial son-in-laws. So all four of my millennials look at both political parties and just kind of shake their heads. So will we have a new political party? Could someone be elected as an independent by 10 to 15 years from now? Hey, that's a debatable point. That's one that we try and interrogate in the book. And I think the answer is probably not. Democratic parties will be able to hold on for some period of time. But I'll close with this on that point, Sonny. There are a lot of folks who feel like somewhere in the Constitution, it says, Article XX says, and there shall be two political parties. One shall be Republican and one shall be Democrat. Newsflash, that's not in the Constitution. And in fact, we didn't start this country with Republicans or Democrats. We started with Whigs, Federalists, Nationalists. Eventually, we got to Republicans and Democrats. 100 years ago, looked like the party that was really going to take off was called the Progressive Party. Its nickname was the Bull Moose Party. It was actually a moderate Republican party, as opposed to the term progressive today, which increasingly means the far left of the Democratic Party. So my point is, political parties will come and go, and what I hope is the long history of our country. And the remarkable thing about the president in 2034 is not that she's a woman, but that she has made it to the Oval Office without being a Republican or a Democrat.
Yes, sir. And we actually thank many readers. Thank you for that homily on that, because we couldn't agree more. And I'm a baby boomer, so. But one question that comes in from a member, and it's fascinating, is given the recent release of information on unidentified flying objects from ships and aircraft off American shores, did you run into any evidence of this in EUCOM when you were in command? And might this be a topic for a next book?
What a great question. First of all, no, I have never, ever run into a serious report that remotely resembles a UFO. Point two, like Andy Warhol said, everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame. I feel like UFOs are getting their 15 minutes of fame. Number three, which is another way of saying, I am very skeptical that there are alien forces that are capable of violating the laws of physics and are not revealing themselves to us, but are merely here observing us, getting ready to probe us, I guess. It seems unlikely to me that there's much there. But I will tell you about the next novel. We just signed, Elliot Ackerman and I, my co-author and I, just signed a 2-book sequel to 2034. And the next book will be called 2054 and will be set, obviously, 20 years further on. It'll take these same storylines and the surviving characters in the book and follow them deeper into the century. And in that novel, unlike the first novel, which really examines China, in the second novel, we're going to really deeply examine cyber, artificial intelligence, Ray Kurzweil's concept of the singularity. If you're not familiar with it, worth a Google, the singularity. It's kind of the merge of biology, computer science, engineering. We're going to kind of examine all of that with a central focus being on cyber. There'll also be a backstory related to what we spoke about a moment ago. It will be a period in time in which Republicans and Democrats as political parties are gone. And I think that's pretty realistic in the 30 to 40-year future. I think we're probably going to see new political parties, and so you'll see what those might look like and how they might interact in the landscape of the mid-century. So think first novel, China, second novel, civil tension and cyber, and then third novel is going to be set another 20 years into the future, 2074, and keeping with the letter C, China, cyber, civil tension. What's the next C in 2074? Climate. What will the climate controversies of today, how will they play out? How will they have impacted geopolitics? What the world will look like? And again, not apocalyptic, just a way to interrogate these important questions. There will be elements of cautionary tale in both of the next 2 novels, and then it'll stand as a trilogy, 2034, 2054, 2070.
Well, that's fantastic. I know I, for one, am excited to see those, and I hope that they come out sooner rather than later. I know you and Elliot are the busiest 2 guys around. I guess I wonder in a number of ways, and I think, first of all, if you examine your work, if an outside person, and that would be me, I examine your work. The very first work that you produced that I was familiar with was how to handle a Spruance-class destroyer. We introduced concepts like 10% ahead pitch trim. What does that mean? All of these kind of notions. And I know as a peer, in a sense, back in those days as Ensign Masso, you explained it to a cohort that got it. And then, of course, this led to, the first books and things like that. But one of the things that your body of work really represents is the inculcation of the need for an ethos that give us each individually a core value, an organizational core value, and everything builds upon that. And it's a standard, and the use of terms like true north and where is your compass heading. And I found that your book 2034 was consistent with those ethos, and the people that you wrote so admirably about, when the day is done, maybe they didn't have the specific tools to be as successful as they could have been in the moment, but it was never about a failure of ethos. And did I get that right? Or, do you have anything you want to say about that?
Oh, you got it oh so right. And, the arc of my writing, I think, reflects another word, which is we are part of a profession. That's part of what makes any profession, be it medicine or the law or engineering. We are professionals in this naval profession. That's why the U.S. Naval Institute is so important to me. That's why the Naval Heritage and History Center is so important to me. That's why the Naval Historical Foundation is so important to me. That's why these naval museums around the country are so important to me. That's why magazines like Proceedings, Naval History, the Naval War College Review are so important to me. And I hope they're important to all of us in this profession. And so I began writing, write what you know. And I had spent 2 years, like all of us in those days, getting qualified and learning and becoming a surface warfare officer on my first ship, as we discussed, those beautiful Spruances. And I thought, I've learned something here. I'm not the be-all, end-all as a ship handler, but I'm going to share what I know. And that very first article, handling a Spruance-class destroyer, is still used. And it also led to many, many people talking about it and writing into Proceedings and commenting on it. And all of us got better. And the point is that when you contribute to that professional dialogue, you recognize that no one of us is as smart as all of us thinking together. That's why you publish things. And then, arc of writing, my next piece was about an engineering department on an aircraft carrier. It was on leading snipes, on the differences in leadership that you need in those engineering experiences, particularly leading 150 boiler technicians on board USS Forrestal. And then, then as a department head, I wrote another article about handling a Ticonderoga-class cruiser. And so gradually, as I learned more and got better at my profession, I got more comfortable sharing bigger ideas. And, we don't obviously need to walk through Jim Stavridis' writing career, but by the time I was, a very senior officer, it felt comfortable to me to talk about big strategic concepts. And just as we're talking about today, and now here I am, in a sense, Sonny, back at the beginning of my writing career in this way. This is the first time I've written a novel. I've never written fiction before. And so I'm learning again. And that's been part of the joy of writing a novel, as distinct from all the other things I've written. It's a different landscape. It's a different medium. It's like moving from painting with oils to painting with watercolors, perhaps. It's a lot messier. The border is blue.
Yes, sir. And heroes of both you and me, George Galderisi has been doing this for a long time. And one point I wanted to make to you is that I run the Surface Navy Association's Literary Achievement Award, and I've done it for more than 20 years. And you were actually one of our evaluators for at least 10 of those at one time. But all of the essay contests that we have, the Dr. London, these types of things, when the midshipmen or JOs submit their work, often they cite you as an inspiration, because when some guy's the engineer officer on the Porter and he writes this brilliant article, or she writes in many cases as well, they write these brilliant articles while they're the engineer officer on a DDG, and they always really cite, you. And I think it kind of goes back to John Morgan, who once said, as he commanded Arleigh Burke, first commanding officer of Arleigh Burke, he asked Admiral Burke if he had any regrets or any thoughts about his career, and he said simply, "I could have done more." And certainly you're the example of that, and it's a beacon for others who want to write and live within the ethos of our Naval Institute. So congratulations, on that. So if the next,
Sonny, if I could just
yes,
add one last point to everyone on this call. When you see an article you like, or you read a book that someone's written, or you see someone getting out there in public, recognize they are taking real career risk to do that, and encourage them, particularly when you find something valuable. Every month I take Proceedings magazine and I write at least half a dozen letters to authors who have taken that career risk, decided to share what they know with the profession. I just finished going through the June issue, and I'm always happy to do that, and I hope others will do it as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir. This is a question from a retired Navy captain named David Durham. And David Durham is brilliant. He's a missile defense expert, surface warfare officer, former detailer. He really did a lot of heavy lifting in his career. And he asked the question, as you've already outlined, 2034 makes the case for increased emphasis on cyber, AI, machine learning, and other technologies. Yet it also makes the point that tactical success requires expertise based on the first principles of naval warfare, that while they rely on technology, not on automation and other advanced systems. Could you expound on that dichotomy?
I can, and to do it, I want to go back to the year 1415, to the Battle of Agincourt. Here you see the English are at the very end of their supply lines. They're with Henry V. It's the night before what's going to be a pivotal battle, and yet Henry gathers them around a campfire. It's kind of symbolic, but and he talks about this previous battle day in English history, St. Crispin's Day. This is where the expression "a band of brothers" comes from. He says, "He who sheds his blood tomorrow shall be ennobled by that, shall be equal to me," is what he's saying. And so my point is, David, and you know this well from your exceptional career, leadership is at the heart of all of it. You can have the greatest technology in the world, and leadership can overcome that. New technology can overcome that. And to stay with Agincourt for a moment, what happened the next day? Those French knights had the most advanced, high-tech, exquisite system in the world for military combat. It was called plate armor. They were loaded up with it. They knew they were invulnerable, and all they had to do was ride across this muddy field, and they would slaughter these lightly armed Brits. How'd that turn out? Well, as most on a call set up by the Naval Historical Center will know, at the Battle of Agincourt, muddy field, slowed them down. English bow using longbows slaughtered them in their thousands. The French were utterly massacred. So leadership really matters. Sometimes it's the low tech that can beat the high tech. New technologies matter. And thirdly, whatever you do, don't go up against the Brits. They are pretty tough in the field.
Yeah, yes, sir, to that. Are there any comments you'd like to make about Elliot and his collaboration? Yes. And obviously you must love it because you're going to do 2 more books.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. The book was my idea, my detailed outline. I wrote a sample first chapter, kind of sold the publisher on it. And then the publisher said, you know, hey, Stavridis, you're a great guy. You're a really good writer, but maybe it'd be better with a more experienced novelist alongside you. They knew Elliot very well. I knew Elliot a little bit. And if you haven't read Elliot's bio, here's someone who's kind of the mirror image of me in combat, if you will. I'm all about cyber, high-tech, maritime. Everyone knows kind of where I am. Elliot's, if you will, the opposite of that. He's deployed 5 times to Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a Marine infantry officer, recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, who also was a CIA ops officer in Afghanistan, and then became a White House fellow. This is his 5th novel, and one of his earlier novels was a finalist for the National Book Award. So working with him was a joy. I learned a lot about developing character. How you fit things together. Fit and finish is very important in a novel, and he's just fun to work with and has become a very dear friend.
Yes, sir. When I was BUPERS, we became very familiar with a term called blue and supported green, and I just wanted to make the point and allow you a minute to comment. You were working for Secretary Rumsfeld at the time. But I mean, you guys had it right in that front office with respect to Navy Marine Corps partnerships and things of that nature. And of course, your father was a career Marine, and you might have been a Marine. Any thoughts on that from just the personal level?
Oh, what a great question! And my dad is smiling down from that great bivouac in the sky. Yeah, he was a Marine colonel, an infantry officer, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. He commanded a reinforced Marine battalion in Vietnam. Bunch of medals, wonderful role model to me. I went to the academy, Sonny, absolutely thinking I was going to be a Marine infantry officer. And what happened to me, and you'll appreciate this as a fellow SWO, for youngster cruise, they sent me to San Diego, put me on a beautiful cruiser, USS Fox, and we set sail at sunset to go to Hawaii. And my first watch up on the bridge, I was up there watching the sun go down, and I thought, man, I was like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. I just knew I wanted to be a ship driver and hoped one day to be a captain. And so that's how I ended up in SWO land. But I think for the purposes of 2034, what's interesting is to watch today what Commandant Dave Berger is doing with the U.S. Marine Corps. I think he's the most switched on, forward-looking, thinking commandant we've had in a couple of decades. And I think that he is shaking up the idea of the Marine Corps. He's gotten rid of tanks, for example. He's getting rid of a lot of the land warfare mentality that's been just embedded in the DNA of the Marines over the last 20 years in the forever wars. And he's back to island hopping campaigns in the Pacific. How are we going to replicate that? I think probably top of his shopping list is how do we take out artificial islands in the South China Sea? I think that's a pretty good place for the Marine Corps. It means we're back in business, working together in a way that, frankly, we have done a lot less of because of the Marines' understandable and relentless, and I believe quite effective focus in Iraq and Afghanistan. But now, hey, I want my Marine brothers and sisters back on board with me if I'm floating around the South China Sea.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I'm going to leave you with the last word. And just prior to that, Sam Cox, Naval History and Heritage Command, they do God's work. They run every museum, every ship museum for the most part, and including nuclear ships, the Nautilus, and they're up there all the time dealing with actually HM&E issues with respect to that. But it's a brilliant command, and it's one that we treasure. They're getting ready to build the National Museum of the United States Navy. A lot of support for that. And so we thank them for their leadership in featuring and sponsoring this book chat. For the audience out there, thank you for tuning in. And of course, you'll find us on YouTube, hopefully in a few hours. And so if there's any glitch or anything, that'll all be polished out. You'll never know. But with all that said, I think I speak for really everyone, Admiral Stavridis. We look up to you. We admire you. We consider you a beacon of integrity and an intellect that we strive to come close to being ourselves. And so as you embark on these journeys, and it's our hope that from people reading this book, terms like artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics, quantum computing will roll off the tongue of the user where maybe it doesn't right now. And an awkwardness with it becomes a familiarity with it. And then we hope that our nation looks at what you've written, listens to the Washington Post in a sense, and really doubles down on our investments in this area. So I'm going to turn the last word over to you with deep thanks and appreciation, and over to you, sir.
Admiral, thank you so much. And as I said up front, the best thing about doing this is just being reunited with you as we were together on the deck plates, running around Baby Swass and on our destroyers on the San Diego waterfront in the, can it be that long ago, the late 1970s. I want to just underline what you just said about the value of history, how important it is, how it shapes us, as professionals in this portion of the Navy, the surface Navy, but really across the entire, you used the word, ethos of the Navy. History is just fundamental to that. My last two books before 2034 were Sea Power, the history and geopolitics of the world's oceans, and most recently, Sailing True North, 10 admirals, historical admirals, and the Voyage of Character. And by the way, my next big nonfiction book is going to be about decision making, about the risk we take when we make the really big decisions. It's called To Risk It All. It also is based on history. So all the more important, if we're going to be professionals in a true profession, that we understand our history. And so I'll close and echo your thanks to Sam Cox, a great friend, to the Naval Historical and Heritage Center, and also Sonny Masso to you and the Naval Historical Foundation. I salute you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Out here.